our definitions of ethics and agency and identity. Because I think that in the kind of world that we are in, that is, I think, what we need to become aware of. That hubris and the greed and the that extractivist mind. That is where I think the real intervention needs to happen, to kind of recognize that this hubristic narrative is not tenable. It's not going to. If you're looking at a larger planetary, I mean, that it's going. There are degrees to that. The we itself is a problem, but at one level, I also feel that there needs to be, this is Dipesh Chakrabarty's idea, right? That the species narrative also needs to be put in the picture somewhere. And I think arts of noticing allows us to acknowledge that shared precarity.
Yeah. You did a really cool piece on Sense8. Sense8's kind of unique. It was a major TV show in which the Sense8s experience each other's sensations collapsing, distance, and difference. And it has a portrayal of interconnected bodies under a neoliberal regime. Do you see the series complicating the narrative of resilience or resistance, or does it offer a different kind of multi-species or collective subjectivity?
So I would say the premise, I enjoyed. I would say the premise, or at least the aspiration, that it probably started out with. I mean, there is something was taking from that. There is a critical potential, but for me, there are also a lot of problems. So I mean, yeah, I mean, let's talk about the what I find enabling about it. I mean, for one, it kind of again it challenges that whole idea of the bounded and there is this sort of uh, through that speculative idea of the sensorial, the sort of the connected sensorial. It's perception that allows us sort of connect with each other and recognize that this idea that we are not isolated silos. There is that possibility of and this is kind of this paradigm of interconnectivity, where literally the body becomes this receptive medium for experiencing the experience of others across a kind of transnational stuff. The transnational is where the problems, and I've looked at this in the essay as well. Yeah. Uh, on the one hand, conceptually, what it is doing is that it's sort of giving us tools with which to rethink an interconnect, right? And as also a fluid and in that sense evolve. Because what it does to then the norms of gender, race, the way it exposes the boundaries of race and gender as kind of construct. There's a kind of deconstructionist kind of possibility there, which I feel that it also does not address its own track, which is that it attempts to represent the transnational while falling into these stereotypes, the locals. So it doesn't. And I remember being very disturbed when I saw the representation of India there, where out of all the things that you could have possibly thought, you had to choose that crowded temple, and you had to choose Ganesh. And again, I felt so there. I mean, I felt that it was again reinforcing certain neoliberal stereotypes of what the global south looks like. That you had to bring in the overcrowded space, and even Kenya for that. I understand that there is an acknowledgement of the water wars and resource scarcity. I mean, the global north is being blamed and held accountable, yes. But the fact that that becomes a kind of paradigm, or that becomes a template for representing these spaces, how, yes, on the one hand, there's an attempt to ghetto us and stereotype, and then sort of say, oh, but we are all connected. So for me, that idea of connection then becomes, it's not foolproof, or it's not entirely so that's one. So I feel like there's a discrepancy between the concept and the execution. The other problem that I have is also with the fact that this was on streaming media, and that's the second part of my chapter. I mean, again, this is part of a proliferation of speculative narratives for streaming, and that the platform itself as contributing to recalibration of as contributing to forms of immaterial, as sort of creating this addicted subject, or this new consumer. And I saw that again reflected in a very uncritical manner in the narrative of the series. That so, yeah, for me, that is where there are these gaps. in the Wachowski's attempt. This attempt, of course, is commendable, but the philosophy and the politics don't kind of come together. And that's my critique of
And absolutely. You also mention the usage of English as a language for the transnational sort of solidarity that emerges through the Sense8s. Can you speak to that a little bit and what your critique is on that?
Yeah, so again, I feel that in Sense8 there is already a kind of understanding of what transnational solidarity looks like or what it should look, where the ability to be connected because of it's a shared ability that they all have because of being a certain kind of Homo sensorium, being a certain kind of species. They're not humans; they are another kind of species. That is what allows you to read and understand each. Now, that it's sort of, I feel there is a problem of applying that notion resonance or solidarity or connectivity to, because it kind of ignores real world difference, right? The sort of real racial or political or gender or economic difference. There is also, and of course, here the medium itself plays a part. The cinematic medium allows for these jump cuts or these transitions where you have a body, so the subject is a Kenyan subject. It's the body of the Korean, girl who's coming and fighting for. So there are these kind of literally the collapse, and the collapse is where my problem is because again, as I said, that there is the danger of erasure. So I feel that specificity, it's so how is specificity being highlighted through these very recognizable tropes of what it means to be Indian, what it means speak a certain kind of Indian English or eat Indian food. So the difference, the specificity, the nuance gets reduced to these very identifiable for the West, identifiable culture. And then the question of connectivity is celebrated as this kind of very sort of convenient and easy and effortless, which is attributed to speculative factors or this, ontological factors. They have this of. So where is the solidarity then? There is no idiom of solidarity. It sort of becomes yes, it's sort of living somebody else's life allows you to appreciate. That's the kind of idea of solidarity that I ultimately sort of garner from this. Right?
So I want to return to the question of slow violence as framed by Rob Nixon and how he intersects with your studies of toxic landscapes and speculative worlds. Does the slow temporal scale of toxicity and waste and these landscapes demand new forms of storytelling or critique?
Yeah, actually, I mean, because it's sort of an. I don't know if I'll be able to pronounce the second cars. Yeah. So he's done work on the dynamics of storytelling in kind of in precarious life. I mean, for one, the way the materiality of toxicants or how pollution in conjunction conditions or social we must be very wary of thinking of toxicity and pollution as isolated. Waste is an entangled phenomenon. Toxicity works in conjunction with pre-existing damage and sort of forms of ruination. And here I'm using and Laura Stober's idea of so toxic imposes itself or implicates itself in ruins to create forms of. So it sort of automatically challenges the concept. If it's something that has a kind of a peculiar gist and a kind of life cycle, the life cycle of the chemical or the pollutant, which I mean, sometimes in the case of radioactive active waste was the individual life. It in that sense, in a temporal sense, so that's the first level. So in a temporal sense, it just chronological time, and in that sense, chronological forms of making sense of the world. Right? Chronological forms of making. It also it also sort of forces us recognize dissonance and inter as part of the meaning making process. That meaning may not always have a logical progression or follow a logical that causality may not be the only way of making sense. When you're looking at these blasted you also have to take into consideration fragmentation, the violence, say displacement, unfamiliarity. So how and so these kind of again enter into the narratives and the notional sort of the episteme of storytelling as some that needs to follow a progression. There's the whole developmental model of storytelling, where no cause needs to lead to an effect, or that everything needs to have a logical connection. That may not be possible or existing in a world where experience itself is ruptured and constantly our experience of time and space itself there are unprecedented forms of experience. Uh, the new. Yeah. So that is one way in which sort of it enters into the space of narrative dialogue. It obviously evinces and compares new ways expression, not just storytelling, but even new ways of expression. How do you call, which you have not encountered before? I mean, the whole the Great Pacific Gyre. Now, how do you have to come up with new ways of new vocabs, not just forms of storytelling, but also language itself needs to be reinvented. In fact, there is, I think, work done by Glenn Albrecht, if I'm not mistaken, where he's come up with a glossary for the answer, where he's invented new terms like solastalgia to talk about these new forms of experience, unprecedented. How do you see your work evolving as the Anthropocene and its critiques sort of continue to shift? So I would like to, I mean, I'm more interested now in kind of shifting from the implications of waste and toxicity, the social for the community, as again, I feel there's some anthropocentric bias in my, to how it, life at a molecular level or even at the level of, so forms of life which have not, so forms of life, the impact toxicity has not really been. So that's something that that's one area I see, and forms of life that in non-human form. So the waste and the non-human is like the next area of inquiry. I'm also interested in interviewing the politics or the limitations. So, for instance, eco cinema or eco photography or even installation or visual art, and sort of trying to think the problematics of, say, exhibitions where you're still using the white cube or you're sort of still working within an apparatus, display and consumption and dissent. And sort of how do we upgrade these or how do we rethink this in light of the right? So yeah. I'm interested in medium also, and that's something that I've not, because my work has been primarily in literature and literary with engagements with cinema and visual arts, but I'm moving more now to problematizing the medium itself, and can we do we think through the materiality of media. Finally, for our listeners who may be encountering these ideas for the first time, where would you suggest they begin? Are there any particular books, films, artworks that opened up these questions for you and that you return to from time to time? Okay, so someone who's encountering these ideas, I will recommend so far sort of understanding toxicity and waste beyond the purely or merely environment. I would Marco Armero's waste. A very it's a monograph. One can finish it in one sitting. There is Max Liberon's Solutions Colonialism. There is also Vinay Gidwani's work on the informal economy. So that's again something that I've not touched upon today, but that's another. Federico De Maria's work on again waste workers, people who actually live and sustain themselves on waste as a form of economy, waste as interest. In terms of cinema, I would Shaunak Sen's recent film on that, which kind of again looks at multi-species entanglements in the context of air pollution in Delhi, but also not just talking about the. So it's about these two amateur doctors who are trying to save the kite, the black kite, which is seen as a scavenger, and hence again it's a kind of life that is relegated to the and how these kites are now endangered because of the pollution and because they keep getting caught in these wires, and so it's also connected with organization. And there's this group of people who are now dedicated to saving the scavenger. Which is again, which also brings the whole concept of it, that which is abjected and ready. Sean, there was also a recent Lithuanian film, Vespa, which is again speculative. It sort of looks at this at sort of a post-apocalyptic Earth. There is Varun Thomas Matthews' Black Dwarfs of the Good Little Babe, which I hugely recommend. It's one of those very few speculative, eco-speculative texts coming out of India that is offering a scathing review, but also critique of so many issues that go hand in hand with environmental right-wing politics, fascism, fake news, and so many things happening there. So that's other, and also this question of art as forms of presence. So to begin with, I mean, these are the cinema that I could.
Yeah.
Sure, there are so many.
No, this has been an amazing interview. Thank you for joining me on the Organic Filaments Network, where we trace the fugitive threads of power, resistance, and planetary life. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to keep these conversations flowing. Again, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Cher. It's been very stimulating, and I'm tempted to go back and read all of my research in the light of the questions that you've asked. Thank you for teaching work so methodically and with so much attention. Yeah, thank you for sort of demonstrating the importance of the arts of noticing. When it comes to our own work. So thank you. It's been a
I learned so